Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back to a time when your most valuable possession buzzed, stung, and occasionally flew away with your entire income. You're going to live a whole day in a quiet medieval village, not as a knight or a noble, but as something far more crucial to your community, a beekeeper. It's early morning, the sky is dim, the ground is damp, and you're already exhausted because in the 14th century, no one invented sleeping in. Your cottage is made of timber and wattle, the kind of place that creaks louder than it protects, and the thatched roof occasionally leaks, but you're used to it. You stretch, yawn, and instinctively duck as a fat spider lowers itself from a ceiling beam like it owns the place. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video again and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when people are listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You rub the sleep from your eyes and fumble toward the wooden door, careful not to knock over the clay jug you use for washing. Outside, the air is cool and earthy, with a hint of manure, probably the neighbor's ox again. Your village is small, tucked into the folds of an overgrown forest, and the nearest castle is far enough away that you are mostly ignored unless taxes are due, which unfortunately they always are. As you step outside barefoot, dewy grass clings to your feet. Chickens scatter, a pig snorts lazily near a crumbling fence. But your attention is fixed on the round straw domes arranged along the edge of your plot, your bee skeps. They're hand-woven, slightly crooked, and look like they could collapse under the weight of a determined crow. But they're your livelihood, and your bees, fuzzy, moody, and tragically ungrateful, are already humming like tiny winged accountants preparing for their quarterly report. You shuffle toward the skeps with the grace of someone half asleep and already regretting today. Bees whiz past your ears. One lodges itself in your hair for a moment before deciding you're not a flower. You wear a long tunic, loosely belted, and over that an old cloth hood. Not because it's effective protection, but because it makes you feel slightly braver. Medieval beekeeping doesn't involve fancy suits. It involves hope. Now, in case you're wondering, yes, people in the Middle Ages really kept bees. And no, it wasn't just for the honey. Beeswax was a big deal, used in candles, sealing letters, polishing armor, and impressing the church. Some towns even treated wax like currency. If your bees did well, you might survive the winter. If they didn't, well, let's just say you'd be eating boiled turnip peels for Christmas. As you lift the lid off one of the skeps, the smell hits you, sweet, grassy, and vaguely warm, like summer trapped in a basket. You peer inside with cautious admiration. The bees ignore you, too busy ferrying nectar and doing bee things. There's comb in there, golden and glistening. You mutter something encouraging under your breath, just in case the bees understand tone. Historians still argue whether medieval folks genuinely believed bees could sense human moods, or if they just liked talking to them for company. Honestly, it's probably both. You reach for your smoker. It's a clunky thing made of tin and wood, and it barely works, but it keeps the bees calm enough that they don't instantly declare war. You puff smoke gently over the hive, then check the honey stores. You'll need to harvest some today, just enough to pay the tithe collector and have a bit left to trade in the village. While inspecting another skep, you spot something odd, a small wax figure tucked between the reeds. It's shaped like a rabbit. You frown, probably the neighbor's kid playing druid again, or someone trying to hex your bees so theirs do better. That kind of thing happens more often than you'd like. There's even a local legend about a beekeeper whose bees stopped flying entirely after he accidentally insulted a wandering minstrel. You made sure to always compliment minstrels now, just in case. Your stomach growls. Breakfast today will be rye bread and a smear of yesterday's honey, luxurious by village standards. You head back inside, grab a crust from the shelf, and tear it with your teeth. It's dry, very dry, but the honey saves it, spreading across your tongue like sunshine. You think about the people who don't keep bees. They have to buy honey with what? Turnips? Outside, the village is starting to wake up. Someone's yelling about a missing chicken. Someone else is chopping wood with more confidence than accuracy. You hear the telltale creak of a cartwheel that needs greasing. Again, it's a sleepy kind of chaos, the kind that feels permanent. Your bees, meanwhile, are already miles away, working the clover fields like tiny unpaid interns. And just as you're settling into the rhythm of the morning, you see him, a figure trudging toward your gate, draped in wool, carrying a ledger that makes your stomach turn. The tithe collector. Because nothing says good morning like someone showing up to remind you that a portion of everything you've worked for now belongs to God, or at least the guy in charge of pretending to speak for him. You sigh. Time to weigh your honey. The tithe collector lumbers closer, his boots squelching slightly in the mud, and you wonder, not for the first time, if this man ever experiences joy. He's not a priest, but he works for the church, which means he possesses the unique talent of making you feel guilty even when you've technically done nothing wrong. His robes are coarse, his beard patchy, and his expression suggests he suspects your bees of heresy. Morning, you mutter, feigning cheer as he approaches. He responds with a grunt, followed by the creak of his satchel as he pulls out a small brass scale and a lump of beeswax shaped like a crucifix. Standard issue, probably. He also carries a scroll, half unfurled, already inked with names of villagers and their contributions. You spot your neighbor's name, Ilsa the Goose Lady, and make a mental note to ask her what she's been feeding her birds, because her honey quota is unreasonably high. You present your offering, 2 clay jars of golden honey and a pouch of wax curls. The collector squints at the jars as though trying to will them into being heavier. He scoops a fingerful, sniffs it, and tastes. No one ever talks about this part, the fact that your honey is subject to what can only be called a medieval sniff test. You resist the urge to mention that the bees lick the same flowers your goats relieve themselves next to. Acceptable, he grunts, with all the enthusiasm of a man approving a pile of warm gravel. He scribbles on the scroll, affixes a wax seal with a heavy stamp, and hands you a scrap of parchment that proves your soul is marginally safer now. For today. Here's the thing about honey in the Middle Ages. It wasn't just food, it was medicine, trade good, religious offering, and occasional bribe. Monasteries relied on wax for candles to light their endless prayers, and nobles preferred honey over sugar, which was still rare and imported from very far away at unreasonable cost. So yes, your bees mattered, but you also live in a system where the church takes 1/10 of everything you produce, and everything includes honey, and wax, and bees if you're not careful. There are rumors of monks in the north who've started claiming spiritual rights over entire hives. Historians still debate whether this was official doctrine or just extremely creative fundraising. The collector leaves, his boots squelching again, and you watch him go with the distant satisfaction of someone who's avoided punishment but not stress. You take your jars back inside, now notably lighter, and return to your stool near the skeps to start your daily maintenance. Beehives in your era are simple things, woven baskets turned upside down, with wooden slats inside if you're lucky. There's no real inspection system. If a skep smells good and the bees aren't dead, you're probably doing fine. You crouch beside the second skep and tap gently, listening for the muffled, harmonious hum. Still alive, still busy, still mildly annoyed with your presence. You notice a patch of mold near the bottom. Only my bottom, common in damp weather. You scrape it away with a flat bone tool and brush off the dead bees. It's a little morbid, but routine. One bee crawls up your sleeve, changes its mind, and backs out. Smart girl. Your neighbor calls over the fence. It's Ilsa. She's holding a pot of something suspiciously sticky. You heard about Maddie? She asks. You shake your head. She leans in dramatically as if bees might overhear. Caught him watering down his honey with barley mash. Said it made the texture earthier. The baker turned him in. You blink. Maddie the brewer, the man whose beard is 80% crumbs and 20% ale. He's not smart enough to fake anything. Still, watering down honey is serious. Monks might overlook one missing chicken, but impure honey, that's spiritual fraud with breakfast implications. Ilsa cackles and wanders off, leaving you to imagine the exact flavor of barley honey scandal. You hope Maddie doesn't end up doing penance by polishing candlesticks for the next 3 winners. As the morning brightens, you decide it's time to prep for the market. You'll need to bring some beeswax and leftover honeycomb to trade. Maybe even a honey salve, popular among those who think it cures skin spots, marital tension, and whatever melancholia is this week. You step inside, rummage through your storage basket, and pull out a small wooden box filled with wax curls. They smell faintly of wildflowers and smoke. You add a few small pots of honey and wrap everything in linen. Your fingers are already sticky. You wipe them on your tunic. This, you realize, is your entire fashion aesthetic now. Permanently tacky. Outside, the bees continue their work, oblivious to economics. You glance at the sun. It's not quite midday, but close enough to leave soon. You secure your goods with twine, sling them in a basket over your back, and take one last look at the skeps. It's a strange life being the village beekeeper. You're respected in a way. People know your honey. They gossip about your bees. Children think you can talk to them. Adults assume you secretly know forest magic. You've leaned into the image, a little. Worn some bones around your belt. Hummed old songs when you harvest. It helps. And anyway, you're probably the only one in the village who can get away with saying, "Sorry, I can't help you fix your cart. I have bee things." You head off toward the market path, swatting flies and adjusting your basket. Behind you, the skeps hum like contented ovens. And in the distance, the tithe collector's figure disappears behind a bend in the road. His ledger growing heavier with every village he visits. 1 down, 13 more to go. And maybe, if you're lucky, someone at the market will have a cinnamon stick today. You haven't tasted cinnamon in years. It smells like wealth. The path to market is rutted and stony, worn by years of cartwheels, livestock hooves, and frustrated feet. You know every curve, every mossy stone, and every puddle that's been sitting in the same exact depression since King Harold was still technically alive. It's not a long walk, maybe half an hour, but long enough that your basket starts to dig into your back, and the beeswax inside begins to soften under the sun's gaze. As you walk, you pass familiar landmarks. There's the half-collapsed shrine to Saint Madwena, whose moss-covered head watches you with the same vague disapproval she's had for a decade. Local legend says she once healed a man's ankle, although other locals insist he was just faking to get out of grain tax. Historians still argue whether Madwena actually lived here, or whether someone just found a rock vaguely shaped like a foot and got excited. Just past the shrine is Old Peter's tree, a twisted oak full of ribbon scraps, bird bones, and wish tokens. No one remembers who Old Peter was. Some say a druid, others say a tax evader. Either way, the tree's considered lucky, so you stop, tug a strand of waxed twine from your basket, and tie it loosely around a branch. For luck, for cinnamon, for fewer bee stings, whatever works. The air smells of damp soil and sheep. Somewhere nearby, a woodpecker drills insistently into a tree like it's trying to mine for gold. You start humming a tune under your breath, a half-remembered lullaby your mother used to sing when bees were swarming outside your childhood window. The kind of melody that never resolves, just circles, like a drowsy thought. Ahead, the village market comes into view. It's not much, just a few carts, blankets, and the occasional ambitious stool, but it bustles on fair days. Today is one of those. The cobbler is already shouting about his new goat leather soles, and a boy with suspiciously orange hair is trying to sell what he swears is dragon salt. It's probably powdered chalk, possibly cheese. You weave between stalls, dodging a goose with territorial issues and a woman waving leeks like they're weapons. You set up beside the cooper's apprentice, who smells faintly of pine and desperation. He nods. You nod back. That's enough conversation for now. Unwrapping your goods feels like a ritual. First the wax, neatly curled and golden, already drawing eyes. Then the honey pots, glinting in the light. And finally the crown jewel, a tiny cake of beeswax molded in the shape of a fish. You didn't mean for it to be a fish, it just sort of happened. But people like fish. They're holy and vaguely edible looking. You're barely finished setting up when a familiar voice creaks over the crowd. You've brought the bomb then? It's Marjorie, the midwife, herbalist, and unofficial authority on boils. She squints at your wares like a hawk evaluating soft cheese. You nod and hand her the small pot of honey salve you made yesterday. She unscrews the lid, dabs her finger, sniffs, nods. Smells like chamomile and minor regrets. Perfect. She trades you a pouch of dried apple slice and a single goose feather. Prize for writing if it doesn't smell too aggressively of goose. Trade begins in earnest. People stop by your stall for candles, comb fragments, and that slightly burnt batch of honey you accidentally overcooked. You tell them it's smoked, which somehow makes it fashionable. You sell out of wax faster than expected. One man buys a lump of it just to chew on, claims it helps his teeth. You don't argue. You're not in the business of dental opinions. A traveling friar wanders past and pauses, eyeing your honey pots. He's young, thin, and smells of ink. Did you know, he begins, that bees are the only creatures on earth not cursed by original sin? You blink. That's comforting. He nods solemnly. Their hum is like a hymn, a pure note. Some say angels taught them geometry. You consider informing him that your bees once chased a cat into a pond and ruined a wedding, but decide against it. Instead, you offer him a honeycomb sliver. He accepts, blesses your elbow for some reason, and moves on. Later, an old woman in layers of linen picks up your fish-shaped wax. This a trout? Could be, you say. She narrows her eyes. Looks like St. Neot's pike, the one that told him to stop fasting. You nod very slowly. It's a devotional piece then. She buys it and walks off, muttering about visions. You're not sure if she meant hers or yours, but either way, you're a religious artisan now. Congratulations. The sun hangs higher now. A lazy warmth seeps through your sleeves. You sip watered ale from a shared mug and listen to the low murmur of the market. Someone starts playing a lute badly. A pig screams somewhere. Children laugh. A man falls into a ditch and pretends he meant to. It's peaceful in a way. Your feet hurt, your back aches, and your hands smell permanently of wax. But you've traded well. The basket is lighter. Your satchel is heavier. You even managed to barter for a sprig of dried rosemary and a nearly whole candle. As you begin to pack up, a young girl tugs at your sleeve. She holds out a coin and points shyly at your last pot of honey. You hand it over. She doesn't speak, but her smile is all the payment you need. Well, that and the coin. You hoist the empty basket back over your shoulder. The road home is the same, but everything feels a bit softer now, your body tired in that good way, where every ache reminds you of something earned. As you pass old Peter's tree, Wayne, you swear the ribbon you tied earlier flutters differently. Not from the wind, just from luck. Or maybe from that waxfish blessing. Either way, the bees will be waiting when you get home. Buzzing, building, judging you quietly, as always. Trade begins in earnest. People stop by your stall for candles, comb fragments, and that slightly burnt batch of honey you accidentally overcooked. You tell them it's smoked, which somehow makes it fashionable. You sell out of wax faster than expected. One man buys a lump of it just to chew on, claims it helps his teeth. You don't argue. You're not in the business of dental opinions. A traveling friar wanders past and pauses, eyeing your honey pots. He's young, thin, and smells of ink. Did you know, he begins, that bees are the only creatures on earth not cursed by original sin? You blink. That's comforting. He nods solemnly. Their hum is like a hymn, a pure note. Some say angels taught them geometry. You consider informing him that your bees once chased a cat into a pond and ruined a wedding, but decide against it. Instead, you offer him a honeycomb sliver. He accepts, blesses your elbow for some reason, and moves on. Later, an old woman in layers of linen picks up your fish-shaped wax. This a trout? Could be, you say. She narrows her eyes. Looks like St. Neot's pike, the one that told him to stop fasting. You nod very slowly. It's a devotional piece then. She buys it and walks off, muttering about visions. You're not sure if she meant hers or yours, but either way, you're a religious artisan now. Congratulations. The sun hangs higher now. A lazy warmth seeps through your sleeves. You sip watered ale from a shared mug and listen to the low murmur of the market. Someone starts playing a lute badly. A pig screams somewhere. Children laugh. A man falls into a ditch and pretends he meant to. It's peaceful in a way. Your feet hurt, your back aches, and your hands smell permanently of wax. But you've traded well. The basket is lighter. Your satchel is heavier. You even manage to barter for a sprig of dried rosemary and a nearly whole candle. As you begin to pack up, a young girl tugs at your sleeve. She holds out a coin and points shyly at your last pot of honey. You hand it over. She doesn't speak, but her smile is all the payment you need. Well, that and the coin. You hoist the empty basket back over your shoulder. The road home is the same, but everything feels a bit softer now, your body tired in that good way, where every ache reminds you of something earned. As you pass old Peter's tree, Wayne, you swear the ribbon you tied earlier flutters differently. Not from the wind, just from luck. Or maybe from that waxfish blessing. Either way, the bees will be waiting when you get home. Buzzing, building, judging you quietly, as always. By the time you reach the edge of your village, the sun has begun its lazy descent, stretching your shadow long and golden across the dirt path. The world softens under this light. Stones look smoother, leaves turn a warmer green, and even the thatch on rooftops seems less scratchy, a more golden brown toast than scratchy straw. Your feet ache, but your basket is mostly empty, swinging lightly against your hip with the easy rhythm of a job well done. You pass by the baker's house, where the smell of roasted barley crusts and onion bread drifts out in teasing waves. For a moment, you consider trading your last goose feather for a roll, but you remember you already promised it to your cousin. He's attempting literacy, which currently means writing his own name on absolutely everything, including the neighbor's pig. As you make your way toward your cottage, you see them, your bees. Not all of them, obviously, but a few early scouts, weaving lazy figure eights in the air. One loops around your head in greeting. Another seems to consider stinging your ear, thinks better of it, and floats off to bother a daisy instead. There's something oddly comforting about their constant presence. Sure, they're territorial and judgmental, but they're yours. You know the sound of each hive, the way one always hums a little sharp, like it's trying too hard. You pass the smaller apiary, the nursery hives, where this year's younger bees are still figuring out which end is up. One flings itself dramatically into a puddle. You sigh. Your cottage comes into view. Crooked chimney, sunken roof beam, and a door that only shuts if you speak to it nicely. Smoke curls from the hearth, and somewhere behind the house, a chicken makes a noise that sounds suspiciously like gossip. You unlatch the gate, step into your tiny garden, where mint grows like a weed, and actual weeds grow like they've got something to prove, and finally allow yourself to breathe. Inside, it smells like lavender and ash, with a faint undercurrent of beeswax and something you forgot to finish cooking yesterday. You set your basket down and stretch. There's honey to strain, but that can wait. Instead, you light a stub of a candle and collapse onto your stool. A soft buzz comes from the rafters. One of the indoor bees has returned. She hovers near a windowsill, inspecting a crack in the wood with the gravitas of a medieval bishop. You offer her a drop of watered honey on your fingertip. She accepts. Now comes one of the stranger parts of your daily routine, reading the bee logs. No, not logs written by bees. That would be terrifying. Rather, they're your notes. Careful, ink-stained pages recording the mood of each hive, the color of the pollen, the aggressiveness of that one drone. You're beginning to suspect is a reincarnated nun with anger issues. You sit cross-legged on the floor, flipping through the vellum. Hive D, very testy today, possibly due to fox intrusion. Left lavender stems at entrance as bribe. Queen from Hive B missing for 6 hours. Returned with pollen and vague air of mischief. Neighbor's child attempted to borrow comb. Advised him gently with stick. Reading back, you're struck by how much of your life revolves around these creatures. Historians still argue whether medieval apiarists genuinely communicated with their bees or simply projected their own problems onto them. You've never been sure which camp you're in. You recall the tale of Brother Ulrich, a 13th century monk who claimed to dream in buzzing tones and insisted his bees whispered bits of scripture during wax production. Skeptics suggested it was moldy rye causing hallucinations. Romanticists prefer to believe he was just very, very lonely. You, at least, aren't hallucinating. Probably. The bees haven't quoted scripture at you yet, though one did dance a perfect figure eight on your hand during Lent last year. Coincidence or divine choreography? Unclear. Outside, the sky shifts toward mauve. The evening chorus begins. Crickets, frogs, a distant owl with terrible rhythm. You head out with your smoker and bellows to check the main hives before night falls completely. Each hive is its own little kingdom. Hive A, mellow, productive, smells like thyme. Hive B, dramatic flair, recently lost a queen and turned the funeral into a week-long sulk. Hive C, absolute chaos. You once saw two bees fight over the same flower while a third just sat and watched, judging silently. You open Hive C gently, puffing smoke to keep them calm. Inside, a beautiful mess, comb laced with fresh pollen, capped honey, and that weird corner where the wax keeps curling like it's trying to become modern art. A few bees crawl over your fingers, tasting your skin. You hum to them. Not a song exactly, more of a tone, deep and low. It's supposed to soothe them. Whether it works or not is irrelevant. It soothes you. As you work, memories rise unbidden, your grandmother's hands guiding yours, showing you how to harvest comb without squashing anyone important. The way she always left a few drops behind. For the Fae, she'd say, though she winked as she said it, she was a practical woman with a deep love for impractical stories. You close the hive, check the others. Hive D's queen is parading around like she owns the place. She does. Hive E has started building combs sideways again, which means another structural intervention tomorrow. And Hive F, the baby, has finally stabilized. You smile. The stars begin to blink awake above. A breeze carries the scent of hawthorn and peat. You finish your rounds, check your legs for bee stowaways, just one this time, and return inside. You light the hearth with a flint and begin to warm a pot of spiced milk. Outside, the buzzing softens, then quiets. The hives go still, the night bees taking over. Their job isn't gathering pollen, it's guarding, patrolling, dreaming strange hexagonal dreams. You sit by the fire and sip your milk. One of your bees has curled up on your windowsill, wings tucked in like a tiny sleeping angel. You think of all the times people have asked why you keep them, why you let yourself get stung, why you live with creatures that can fly away whenever they like. The answer is simple. They stay. Not all, not always, but enough. And somehow in the chaotic, humming mess of wings and wax, you found a rhythm that feels like home. Outside, the wind shifts. A single bell chimes far away, probably a cow. You yawn and stretch. Another day ends in the court of the bees. Tomorrow you'll try making lavender-infused wax again, despite the last batch melting into a vaguely floral puddle. Progress. The next morning arrives not with a rooster, but with a bee. Specifically, one who's decided your nose is a perfectly suitable landing pad. You swat gently, muttering something about boundaries, and sit up groggily, the woven blanket slipping to your lap. Your room is filled with the soft light of early dawn, pale gold like diluted honey. The hearth has gone cold, the candle stub burned itself into a waxy comma. Outside, the buzzing has begun again, low and steady. It's a sound you now associate with being alive. You stretch and roll your shoulders, vaguely aware of a crick in your neck and a mosquito bite that may or may not be a bee's passive-aggressive cousin. The cottage creaks as it warms in the sun, and somewhere in the garden, a squirrel shrieks like it's lost a bet. You wash your face in a shallow basin with cold rainwater collected in a barrel outside. It's bracing. You suspect your ancestors didn't invent soap so much as just hope the mud would fall off eventually. Still, the rosemary-scented scrub you make from ash and lard does a fair job, at least according to the one neighbor who complimented you before falling into a ditch. Breakfast is practical. A hunk of brown bread, a bit of soft cheese wrapped in thyme leaves, and a spoonful of honey drizzled on top like morning gold. As you chew, you study your map. Well, map is generous. It's more a collection of scribbles and sketches, tracking wildflower growth and which patches the bees have recently raided like fluffy sky pirates. Today, you're visiting the lime trees by the old abbey ruins. They're in bloom, which means bees will be drunk on nectar and you'll be playing chaperone to dozens of pollen-covered revelers. You gather your gear, smoker, veil, a little pouch of dried mint to bribe a particularly temperamental hive. You also pack a snack for later, because even medieval beekeepers know the tragedy of getting stuck in a thistle patch on an empty stomach. The walk to the abbey is familiar, lined with fern-covered stones and the occasional judgmental goose. Along the way, you pass the home of old Anselm, who believes bees can read Latin and once tried teaching his swarm the Psalms. They repaid him by swarming his beard. Historians still argue whether this was an act of reverence or rebellion. As you approach the ruins, you catch your first whiff of lime blossom, sweet, heady, slightly citrus. The trees stand like ancient sentinels around the crumbling stone walls. Bees drift lazily through shafts of light, looking like glitter caught in slow motion. You greet the abbey grounds the way your grandmother taught you. A nod to the tallest stone, a touch to the earth, and a whispered, "Don't sting me today, I brought raisins." It's not magic. Probably. You inspect the wild hive nestled in the abbey's hollow wall. It's thriving. Fat combs of amber honey, bees working like tiny monks, humming a silent hymn. You can tell by the activity that this is a healthy hive. No signs of disease, no slumped bodies at the entrance. Just purpose. With slow hands, you open your satchel and set out a small bowl of mint water, an old apiarist trick to pacify bees without smoke. A few come over, curious. One drinks too fast, burps, and flies into a stone. You sigh. You collect a small amount of comb, careful to leave most of it intact. This honey will be used not just for food, but for trade, salves, and possibly bribing the village clerk into overlooking your unlicensed candle-making operation. Midway through your work, you pause. The abbey walls sing, not literally, but with sound. The bees, the birds, the wind rustling through lime leaves. It all comes together in a low, rhythmic harmony. You sit still, holding your breath, not wanting to break the spell. This, you realize, is why you do this. Not the honey, not even the bees, though they're a part of it. It's the moments like this, hidden pockets of peace, stitched into the landscape like forgotten verses in a lullaby. Eventually, you pack up, marking the hive's state in your log. You draw a quick sketch of the comb layout. Later, you'll compare it to last month's drawing and try to track any strange patterns, like the time they built in a perfect spiral, which made no sense, but looked vaguely like a pastry. You were hungry that day. On your walk home, you stop at the creek to refill your flask and rinse off a bit of honey that somehow ended up in your armpit. As you squat by the water, you spot a fish with what appears to be a very smug expression. You nod respectfully. Passing through the fields, you notice a new patch of wild chamomile. You mark it on your map with a small bee-shaped doodle and a note. Potential nap spot. Field research, obviously. Back at your cottage, the afternoon sun filters through the window like spilled gold. You store the comb in a cool basket lined with linen, then check on your indoor observation hive, a small glass-sided contraption that lets you watch your bees live their best lives without fully invading theirs. Inside, all is well. The queen is laying, workers are building, and someone's trying to drag a dead ant out like a stubborn couch. You tap the glass lightly in appreciation. Evening drifts in again. You roast a few root vegetables over the fire, drizzle them with melted wax for a strange but not unpleasant glaze, and add a sprinkle of dried bee bread for crunch. Dinner. Weird, rustic, and surprisingly gourmet. Later, you sit on your doorstep with a bit of spun wool in your lap, spinning while listening to the night buzz return. A few bees circle your candle. One lands on your finger and stays there, just sitting, like it's thinking deep thoughts. Somewhere in the village, a lute plays, probably badly, but it adds to the charm. You glance at your hands, sticky, scraped, stained with pollen and ink. A beekeeper's hands, and not just any beekeeper. You. Later, the fair announces its Best Jar of Pickled Something contest. You don't enter, but you watch as jars of everything from beets to questionable eels are judged by a panel of elders with strong stomachs and weak eyesight. Someone tries to enter your honey under the label bee brine. You make them leave. As the day winds down, the children disperse, a few with handmade beeswax candles, one with a bee puppet you hastily crafted out of hay and string. Your display tent is a wreck, pollen dust everywhere, one of the jars knocked over, and a mysterious, sticky handprint on your satchel. But you feel oddly accomplished. Back home, you collapse into a chair, boots kicked off, and tunic still smelling faintly of roasted meat from the fair. You set the kettle on, letting the steam fill the room while you spoon a bit of lavender honey into your mug. The fair sounds still echo in your head. Bells laughing, and that lute player who somehow got worse. As night falls, you step outside. The stars are beginning to prick the sky with quiet confidence, and the distant hum of your hives is just audible under the rustle of grass and the occasional owl-shaped mystery. You walk the perimeter of your apiary, checking each hive by moonlight. They're settled, cool, and still, tucked in like a dozen warm sleeping towns. You pause by the oldest hive, the one with the twisted knot in the front like a sleepy grin. You whisper a few words, thanks, encouragement, and a bit of gossip. The bees don't answer, but one buzzes near your ear and then lands on your shoulder. A night shift worker, maybe, or just nosy. Back inside, you scratch out the day's events in your beekeeping log. Fair was successful. Minor noble showed interest in honey scent. Bee puppets surprisingly popular. No stings. Only slightly lost my mind. You end the note with a small doodle of a bee in a crown, its tongue stuck out. By the next morning, your ankles are sore, your arms smell faintly of honey, and you've dreamt of talking bees trying to collect taxes. You chalk that last part up to the fair. Still, no time to lounge about. Today is the start of swarm season, and if there's one thing worse than losing a swarm of your bees, it's watching them do it right in front of you, like you're a guest at their tiny escape party. You head out early, basket slung over your shoulder, a long stick in hand, for knocking branches, not for dueling rogue bees, though both have happened, and a light veil draped loosely over your head. You mutter to yourself as you walk. You leave for one fair, and suddenly everyone wants a new queen. Swarming is natural, of course. When a colony gets too crowded, they raise a new queen, and the old one takes half the bees and leaves in a glorious mid-air procession. It's not personal, it's just real estate. Your first clue that one of your hives is ready to rebel? A long, low buzz, heavier than usual. It sounds like 100 tiny engines warming up. And then, the unmistakable sight, a moving blur of bodies pouring from the hive like a slow, rolling fog. You tilt your head back and watch them swirl above the garden, a bee tornado with a queen at its center, and absolutely zero consideration for your schedule. They cluster on a nearby plum tree, forming a writhing football of bees that hangs like a suspicious fruit. You sigh. Of course it's the tallest tree. You eye your climbing ladder and calculate the likelihood of falling into your gooseberry bush again. The trick with catching a swarm is patience and prayer. You place your extra hive box beneath the branch, climb carefully, very carefully, and give the limb one good shake. The bee ball drops with a soft thump, 1,000 wings ruffled but unoffended. The queen is in the box, hopefully, and the rest will follow her scent, assuming she hasn't already flown off on a spontaneous vacation. You sit by the hive for a while, sipping water and watching the bees march into their new home, little golden soldiers reclaiming order. Some circle you inquisitively, and you greet them out loud like you're hosting a family reunion. No, I don't know where the honeycomb is yet. Check the basement. By mid-morning, you've secured the swarm and triple-checked the queen's presence. Crisis averted. You mark the box with charcoal. Swarm 7, queen likely smug. Still, you're not done. Swarming season means more bees on the move, and the local priest has requested your help. Not with his own hives, he wouldn't dare, but with the abbey ceiling, where a colony of wild bees has built a comb the size of a sheep. A divine inconvenience, he calls it. So now you're squinting up at the rafters, robed figures mumbling behind you, and a bucket of smoke at your feet. You try to look competent and not like someone who once fell out of a hayloft while arguing with a wasp. The abbey bees are calmer than expected. You speak to them in a low voice, humming slightly, not for their sake, but to reassure the monks. You cut the wild comb down slowly, rehoming it into a wooden box. The bees follow. One monk faints, possibly from the heat, possibly from excitement. You pretend not to notice. Back at your apiary, the swarm from earlier has settled nicely. The queen is active, the workers are exploring, and one has found a tiny crack in your window, which it uses to periodically zoom into your kitchen like an unscheduled audit. You spend the evening checking all the other hives for swarm cells, those long, peanut-shaped chambers where new queens are grown. You destroy a few, leave a couple, for experimental purposes, and wonder briefly what it feels like to have your sisters choose your life's path before you're even born. Probably a bit like being the youngest sibling in a royal family, minus the feathered hats. As you work, you remember something your old mentor used to say. Every hive is a monarchy pretending to be a democracy. You never understood what she meant until your bees started ignoring you. Dinner is leftover cheese, wild greens, and a heel of bread that could double as a projectile weapon. You drizzle it all with linden honey from last summer and chew slowly, thinking about how swarm season always reminds you of spring fever. Everyone restless, full of ambition, and slightly unhinged. As the sun slips low, you journal the day's chaos, noting the abbey rescue, the successful swarm catch, and the suspicious look a blue-tinted bee gave you near Hive 3. Might be time to check for nectar from the cursed hemlock grove again. You end your entry with a sketch of the plum tree, the bee ball still hanging there in memory, and a note that reads, "Climbed it, didn't fall, a good day." You rise to a low buzzing chorus, a sound you've grown to interpret the way others might read tea leaves. This morning it says, "The bees are restless, again." As you shuffle outside, boots in hand, the sky is overcast in that soft, eggshell gray way that suggests a drizzle is politely on its way. The air smells like damp earth and anticipation. You take your tea, strong, herbal, slightly bitter, out to the hives and sit on the overturned barrel that serves as your throne in the bee kingdom. Hive 4 is acting odd. The foragers are moving in sluggish zigzags, and the guard bees at the entrance are more aggressive than usual, bumping your hands as if to say, "We see you, we're not in the mood." You peer inside carefully and, there it is. Mites. Tiny reddish-brown hitchhikers crawling across a few drone larvae. Varroa destructor, the bee version of fleas, ticks, and tax auditors combined. Treating mites is an art. Too strong a solution, and you anger the bees. Too weak, and the mites laugh in your face. You opt for the powdered sugar method today, not because it's the most effective, but because it's the least upsetting, and you're not in the mood to get stung in the elbow again. You sprinkle the sugar like a pastry chef with a vengeance, coating the frames and bees alike. They respond with offended buzzing and a great deal of grooming, which is the point. It knocks the mites loose and onto a collection tray below. You use the downtime to clean your tools. Hive knives, smoker bellows, wax scrapers, each stained with years of honey, soot, and questionable decisions. You sharpen the blade edges with a smooth stone, half for function, half to look like you know what you're doing when curious villagers stop by. Today it's Adela the spinner who barters yarn for wax. She shows up with a spool of soft golden thread and stories of a goose that laid an egg in the middle of the bakery. You give her a candle shaped like a beehive and a jar of spring honey. She leaves humming. You check your queen excluders, wooden grids that prevent the queen from laying eggs in the honeycomb meant for harvesting. Hive 6's queen has slipped through somehow and laid a neat line of eggs in your prized comb frame. You sigh. Bees do not follow rules. They follow vibes. You remember briefly that in ancient Egypt, beekeepers would float hives down the Nile, chasing seasonal blooms. You picture yourself in a little boat, surrounded by buzzing boxes, drifting lazily past reeds and crocodiles. Then you remember how poorly you row and how bees don't like sudden movement. Fantasy over. By midday, the weather has cooled and the bees have settled again. You sit near the hives with a cloth over your lap, shaping wax into small figurines. A toad, a spoon, a lopsided sun. Bees land on your shoulders and hands, watching like tiny supervisors. One decides your ear is a particularly interesting landing pad. You freeze, then slowly tilt your head until she flits away. Around you, the landscape hums softly. The mint is in bloom, the dandelions are back, and the willow tree by the creek looks like it's trying to dip its toes. A heron wades nearby, staring at you like it suspects you owe it money. Later, you check the bee graveyard behind your house, a quiet place where old or diseased hives are stored. Empty now, but still holding the scent of wax and memories. You pause by one particularly weathered box and run your fingers over the carved letters. Buzzingham Palace, a joke from a past apprentice. She was terrible at honey extraction, but excellent at naming hives. You sit there a while, remembering lost queens, bad harvests, miraculous recoveries. Beekeeping isn't a job, really. It's a truce, an ongoing conversation with thousands of tiny minds who neither care for your comfort nor your plans, but tolerate your presence if you come bearing sugar water and patience. Evening rolls in quietly, the sky streaked in amber and gray. You light a small fire and heat some wax for sealing jars. The scent fills the air, sweet, resinous, calming. It sticks to your hands and your sleeves and your soul. Before bed, you do one last check, just a loop around the apiary with your lantern. The bees are still tucked into their combs, humming lullabies only they understand. You whisper goodnight to them, because you're that kind of beekeeper, and because on some level it feels rude not to. Back inside, you sip a mug of hot milk with clover honey, flipping through a book of bee-related superstitions. Never curse near a hive. Tell your bees when someone dies. If a bee lands on your hand, good luck will follow. You smile and close the book. Today was tiring, but today, like the best days, was full. The next morning is cold in that sharp, nose-prickling way that announces a shift in the season. You wake under too many blankets, rubbing the sleep from your eyes with hands that still smell faintly of beeswax. Outside, the dew clings to every leaf and blade, and the air is so still it almost echoes. The bees naturally are not thrilled. Cold snaps mess with their internal calendars. Foragers hover near the entrance, shivering like grumpy commuters waiting for a late carriage. Inside the hives, the workers huddle close, wings vibrating in tiny unison to keep the queen warm. It's like a tiny buzzing blanket fort with strict admission policies. You start the day by warming some syrup on the hearth, just a bit of sugar and water, steeped with a sprig of thyme for the bees' imaginary morale. The syrup goes into feeders placed inside the weaker hives. It's not much, but it helps them bridge the sudden drop in nectar. Your mind wanders as you work. You think about the ancient Chinese texts that described beekeeping methods thousands of years ago, how they carved hives into clay and believed bees were gifts from the stars. You wonder if your bees would feel flattered by that, or just insulted you haven't upgraded their housing in years. Around midday, you start your comb inspection. Not for honey this time. This round is all about wax. Clean, golden wax comb is worth more than most people assume. Candles, salves, sealing materials, even a sort of medieval chewing gum that tasted like sweet bark and regret. You bring out the press and begin rendering old comb, melting it down, filtering out the bits of bee feet and stray pollen. The scent is rich and comforting. Your entire kitchen smells like summer. You pour the clean wax into carved molds, small discs, taper candles, a frog holding a lily pad. Why? Because you can. As the wax cools, you start your next project, preparing for a visit from the village schoolmaster. He's bringing his students for what he calls a living lesson in natural sciences. You suspect it's just an excuse to eat honeycomb and laugh at you in your bee hat. You prep your teaching materials, a clear comb frame, a few sketches of bee anatomy, somewhat exaggerated to appear friendlier, and a jar of dead bees for examination, which you've labeled historical volunteers. You also pack a tiny vial of propolis, the resinous bee glue made from tree sap and ambition, and plan to let the children smell it. It smells oddly antiseptic, like a forest after a thunderstorm. The schoolmaster arrives late, out of breath, and apologizing for his muddy boots. The children are wide-eyed, carrying more questions than lunch. You lead them gently through the apiary, narrating in your softest, most theatrical voice. This is Queen Petunia the Fourth, ruler of Hive 3 and part-time tyrant. The children giggle. One of them tries to pet a drone and is deeply surprised by its softness. You show them how bees dance to communicate. Tiny figure eights with big consequences. Historians still debate whether ancient cultures observed and copied the waggle dance in their rituals. You tell them, and one child gasps, like you've just revealed bees can read. When they leave, one small boy slips you a crumpled note that says, "Thank you, bee wizard." You plan to frame it. That evening, you find yourself wandering out past the fence, beyond the line of hives, into the meadow where wildflowers have started to die back. You crouch near a patch of thistle and spot a bumblebee, slower than your honeybees, sleepier, but still determined. You watch her for a long time. As twilight falls, you begin your last chore, setting mouse guards on the hives. Autumn brings not just wind and rain, but desperate rodents looking for warm places to nibble wax and steal honey. You gently affix the metal grids over the entrances, small enough to keep mice out, wide enough to let the bees pass. While fitting one, you spot a single bee crawling slowly, almost sluggishly, over the edge. You pick her up, warm her in your hands, and whisper, "Hang in there, comrade." She twitches her antennae like she heard you, then flies off, possibly in search of something better than your hand. Back indoors, you stir your wax once more and pour a final candle. This one you label with the date, the hive of origin, and a quick doodle of a bee with a monocle. You're not sure why. It just felt right. You close the night by sipping honey tea near the window, the scent of wax and thyme wrapping around you like a second skin. The hives out there are quiet now, tucked in for the night, their humming softened, their energy pooled inward. You smile and whisper to yourself, "They're good. They'll make it." And you believe it. You wake to wind. Not the casual breeze that tousles hair and stirs curtains like an indecisive ghost, but the kind that demands attention, pushing at shutters, tugging at roof slates, and howling its own opinions down the chimney. The bees, predictably, want no part of it. They stay inside, balled tightly in their hives, conserving heat, living off honey, and probably arguing over who gets the warmest spot next to the queen. You don't blame them. You stay indoors too, wrapped in your coziest wool, mug in hand, and a growing list of maintenance chores you've been putting off since midsummer. You decide to brave the weather anyway, because if you don't check on the hives during windstorms, no one will. You pull on your thickest coat, the one that makes you look like an off-duty lighthouse keeper, and stomp outside like a minor folk legend. Out at the apiary, the hives groan slightly under the wind, but they're intact. You double-check the stone weights on the lids and add another log to one that's wobbling. Hive 2 has developed a suspicious lean, so you wedge a flat rock beneath its front leg and pat it like a patient mule. It doesn't respond because it's a box full of bees, but the gesture feels respectful. Back indoors, you take out your winter checklist. Bee health isn't just about what happens in spring and summer. Winter prep is a game of preemptive decisions, most of which make you feel like a paranoid parent sending your kids off to boarding school. You start by mixing up a new batch of fondant, sugar paste basically, shaped into patties you'll place inside the hives when their honey stores get low. Some beekeepers use marshmallows. You tried that once. It ended in chaos and a very sticky inspection. As the fondant sets, you clean your hive tools again, this time with vinegar and salt, an old method your grandmother swore by. She also swore bees could smell lies, which you're still undecided on. To distract yourself, you revisit your bee log, a thick leather-bound journal where you've chronicled everything from swarming events to odd bee behavior to your failed attempt to name a hive after each of the planets. Mars died in a rainstorm. Jupiter requeened itself twice in a week. Saturn's doing fine. You reread your entry from exactly 1 year ago. Hive 4 unusually docile. Queen seems lazy. Gave motivational speech. Will monitor. That queen did not improve. She was replaced 3 weeks later by a much more industrious monarch named Nectarine II. Later that afternoon, the wind dies down and you venture back out. You crouch beside Hive 1 and place your ear to the side, listening. There it is, the faint low hum, a soft, living vibration. The sound of 30,000 tiny creatures agreeing not to die today. You smile. That sound is your reward. You make the rounds, adding insulation wraps to the outer walls of each hive. It's not strictly necessary in your region, but you like to think the bees appreciate the gesture. Hive 5 has a draft coming in through a crack near the lid. You plug it with a bit of beeswax and a fragment of your own mitten. Sacrifice in the name of warmth. Back inside, you sit by the hearth and warm your fingers. You leaf through your collection of odd beekeeping lore. Some of it real, some of it pure nonsense, and some comfortably in between. One passage claims bees can sense royal blood. Another insists that if you move a hive without telling the bees, they'll get offended and leave. You've never tried. You're not that brave. Evening falls and the wind has tired itself out. The air outside is still and sharp, the kind of stillness that makes sound travel farther and thoughts sit heavier in your chest. You take one last stroll through the apiary, lantern in hand, watching your breath curl in front of you like speech from another world. You pause at Hive 3, the queenless one from a few months back. The new queen has settled in now, but it was a tense few weeks. The workers had panicked at first, buzzed louder, flew more erratically, built queen cells like teenagers decorating lockers. You gave them a new queen cell from Hive 6, and after some initial skepticism, they accepted her. A quiet coronation, witnessed only by you and a few confused wasps. You knock softly on the wood, once, twice, and walk away. Back in bed, under a mound of quilts, you listen to the faintest hum from your window. It could be the wind returning or a barn owl passing judgment from a distant perch. But in your head, it's the bees, still working, still alive, still humming. You wake to frost. It's not snow yet, just a delicate film across every surface, as if the world has been brushed with a sugar glaze. The grass crunches softly under your boots, and your breath comes in thick, cartoonish puffs. You half expect to see a tiny bee in a knitted scarf. The hives are still, not silent, never silent, but subdued, like a dozing orchestra tuning beneath heavy blankets. You check the entrances. No bodies, no excessive moisture, no signs of invaders. Just the occasional drone, sluggish and confused, blinking like he's late for an exam. Today's plan is simple. Construct a windbreak. You've had too many close calls with winter gales knocking over hives, and while your rock and log strategy has worked so far, it feels provisional. Time to upgrade. You gather the materials, planks, old fencing, bits of salvaged barn wood that smell like hay and regret, and begin assembling a crude barrier. Nothing fancy, just a three-sided wall angled to deflect wind while still letting the bees catch the occasional sunny draft. You hum as you work, pausing now and then to sip tea from a flask that's somehow already cold. As you hammer in the final stake, you think about other cultures' winter beekeeping techniques. In Russia, hives were often buried up to their lids in snow, the insulation providing more stable temperatures than open air. In ancient Turkey, beekeepers kept horizontal log hives under their homes, like roommates who paid rent in pollination. You test the stability of your new windbreak with a gentle push. It holds, a small victory. You give it a name, the Bee Bastion, and wonder if you've finally crossed into the territory of eccentric rural wizard. Later, you return inside and dig into your storage jars. You've saved a little chunk of honeycomb from each hive, just enough to track flavor differences. Hive 1's honey is light, almost floral, like clover and linen. Hive 4's tastes darker, almost smoky, with notes of bark and mulberry. Hive 6 mysteriously tastes like cucumbers. You nibble a bit from each and jot notes in your log. Hive 3, tangy, faint thyme. Might pair with goat cheese. Note to self. Acquire goat. Afternoon brings a surprise. The arrival of Old Thistle, your unofficial mentor and frequent supplier of unsolicited advice. He's bundled in 4 layers and carrying a basket of acorns and pickles, which he insists are a seasonal tradition. From somewhere, probably. He peers at your windbreak, grunts approval, and mutters, "Not bad for someone who once tried to feed bees bread." You did, once. It was a misunderstanding involving a folk remedy and a mislabeled jar. Together, you inspect the hives. He holds a stethoscope to one, and listens like a Victorian doctor diagnosing a bout of melancholia. Sounds healthy, he says, though Hive 2 buzzes like it's holding secrets. You decide to take that as a compliment. As evening draws near, you prepare a batch of oxalic acid vapor. It's a natural mite treatment used during the broodless winter period, when the tiny parasitic varroa mites have fewer places to hide. You wear your respirator and gloves, feeling like a post-apocalyptic gardener, and administer the treatment with slow, careful precision. Historians still debate whether ancient beekeepers understood parasites at all, you murmur to yourself. But judging by the preserved Egyptian hives, they at least understood obsession. The treatment goes well. No bee casualties. You mark the date in your log, adding a small bee doodle with sunglasses to signal success. Night falls early now. The last light is gold through skeletal branches, casting the hives in a kind of gentle silhouette. You stand a while in the cold, arms crossed, watching for nothing in particular. The stars come out one by one, like cautious guests at a quiet party. Back inside, you light one of your homemade candles, the one from Hive 6 wax, oddly cucumber-scented, and the scent calms you. You sit by the fire and thumb through your grandmother's bee almanac. There's a page dog-eared for winter legends, bees singing under snow, bees dreaming of flowers, bees huddled in a perfect spiral that matches ancient temple blueprints. You don't know if any of it's true, but it feels real. And when you finally climb into bed, you close your eyes to the image of Hive 3, silent, wrapped in wool, nestled behind its new wall, holding tight to its secrets and warmth. Still humming, still dreaming. You wake to silence. No wind, no rain, not even a creak from the trees. Just a stillness so complete it feels almost staged, like the set of a play between acts. Outside, frost clings to every branch and fence post like a decorator who's gone a little overboard. The sky is that pale, washed-out blue that means winter is truly here, and it's not going anywhere for a while. You slip on your boots, careful not to wake the cat, who's curled into an impossibly compact spiral of fur and suspicion. Stepping outside, your breath hits the air like fog from an ancient temple, and the cold sneaks into your sleeves as if it's been waiting for the opportunity all night. You walk the familiar path to the apiary, each step crunching like popcorn underfoot. The hives sit quietly, wrapped in their insulation. The entrances reduced to tiny notches, just wide enough for one bee at a time. You kneel by Hive 4, your hand resting on its side. You don't expect movement, not in this weather, but sometimes you can feel that faint warmth, that tiny vibration that tells you all is well. This morning it's there. Back inside, you brew tea and start organizing your old bee logs by year. You've always meant to digitize them, but suspect that doing so would erase some essential charm. Like scanning a love letter or translating a lullaby. You find a loose scrap from last winter tucked between pages. Idea, start a bee choir. Train drones to buzz in harmony. Sell tickets. You chuckle and pin it back on the wall of someday ideas, right between queen trading cards and apian spa for stressed bees. After breakfast, you decide to sort through your wax stores. You have several large blocks now in various shades, ivory, pale gold, one that's suspiciously greenish, Hive 2 again, and you begin melting some down to make candles. The house fills with that distinct, warm honey scent, thick and soothing, like a memory of baking cookies in a sunlit kitchen. You pour the melted wax into old molds, a tiny skep, a clumsy bear, and one shaped like a rather judgmental owl. As the candles cool, you carve time to repair some old frames. The wooden slats have cracked, and the foundation wax is brittle. You take your time with the glue and nails, humming a tune your grandmother used to sing while working with beeswax. It was probably nonsense, something about a bee that fell in love with a lavender bush, but it stuck in your head like sap on fingers. Midday brings an odd sort of peace. You sit at the window, sipping your now lukewarm tea, and watch a single bird, some fluff ball of a finch, hopping along the fence rail. You wonder if he's aware of the thousands of tiny lives sleeping in the hives beneath him. Probably not. But you like to think he feels the calm too. You use the quiet to review your spring plans. You'll need to order new foundation sheets, clean out the swarm boxes, maybe add a second tier to Hive 5 if they keep growing like last year. You pencil in, paint new boxes, and immediately draw a small sketch of a hive with racing stripes. Unlikely, but not impossible. In the late afternoon, you reread a passage from a 19th century beekeeping manual. The author warns against excessive fretting over one's colonies, noting that the bees do not share your anxieties and are unlikely to reward them with greater productivity. He has a point. You close the book and glance out the window. The shadows are long now. You grab your coat and walk back to the hives one more time. This time, you bring a candle, the owl one, and set it on a flat rock beside Hive 3. It flickers faintly in the cold air, casting a sleepy yellow glow. Not for warmth exactly, more like a little vigil, a signal that someone's watching, someone remembers. You sit beside the hive until the flame gutters low, your breath slow and even. The stars begin to peek out, just a few pinpricks, shy at first, then braver as the sky deepens. You think of all the things these hives have weathered: storms, parasites, the occasional nosy raccoon. You think of how thousands of individual lives hum together in the dark, clustered tightly, vibrating just enough to stay warm. Not frantic, just enough. It feels like a lesson, though you're not quite sure what the message is. Something about stillness, maybe, about patience, about trusting the warmth you've built. Even when the world outside goes silent, you rise, brush the frost from your coat, and head inside. Your candle molds are ready. The house smells like comfort. The bees sleep. And so soon will you. You sleep late today. Not on purpose, just the kind of deep, delicious sleep that only comes when the world outside is frozen solid and all your responsibilities are either hibernating or too cold to complain. When you do finally stir, the house is still dim, lit only by the faint blue light of a winter morning nudging through the curtains. You stretch, creak a little, you and the floorboards both, and head straight for the kettle. Tea first, then bees. Outside, the frost is so thick it looks like the world's been dipped in powdered sugar. The hives are quiet, still wrapped in their jackets, little plumes of warmth occasionally puffing from the entrances like miniature chimneys. You check on the windbreak. Bee Bastion is still standing tall, weathering the cold like a stoic medieval guard. But today's not about chores. Today is for observation. You settle onto the bench you made from 2 logs and a broken door, bundled in layers of wool and hope, and simply watch. And there it is, tiny but clear. A single forager bee emerging from Hive 6. She hesitates at the entrance, antennae twitching like she's checking a weather app, and then lifts off in a slightly wobbly flight path. You can practically hear her muttering, just popping out for a quick errand. You smile, watching her loop around a nearby bush and return to the hive almost immediately, looking unimpressed. Not much nectar out here, just frost and dried stems. Still, she checked. That counts. You think about what the books say, how a colony may send out scouts even in the depths of winter, just to test the air. It's like a ritual, a quiet affirmation that the world is still turning, even if it's too cold to dance. You jot it down in your log. First scout flight spotted. Brave or foolish, either way noted. You spend the rest of the morning tracing the sun's lazy path across the sky, watching how it hits the hives, calculating angles for better placement next season. Hive 3 gets good light in the early hours, but Hive 5 practically lives in shadow. You consider trimming back the nearby hedge. Come spring, of course. Today it's just too cold for loppers and ambition. Back inside, you work on your winter project, a hand-painted bee map. It started as a joke, a scribble of your apiary layout with little caricatures of each queen. But now it's turned into something rather lovely. You've drawn all the hives to scale, added tiny trees, labeled the flowers they favor, even included danger zones. Raccoon Alley, the slippery rock of doom, etc. It's part art, part record, part love letter to a community that can't read. As you paint, you think about ancient beekeepers and how they kept track of their hives. In medieval Europe, some marked each hive with a carved symbol to help illiterate assistants remember which was which. Others named them after saints or star constellations. Historians still debate whether the bees were moved intentionally or just got bored, you muse, adding a little starburst next to Hive 1 for flair. You pause for lunch, which is mostly cheese and increasingly stale bread, but you drizzle a little of Hive 2's honey on top and call it gourmet. The flavor is oddly herbal, like someone put rosemary in a sunbeam. Later, you sit by the window again, watching snow begin to fall. Not heavily, just a few lazy flakes drifting down like forgotten bits of sky. The hives are barely visible now, their colors muted beneath the frost, but you know they're there, humming, waiting. You pull out a book of bee myths and read a curious tale from the Balkans. It's said that if a beekeeper dies, someone must whisper the news to the hives, or the bees will leave in grief. It's oddly touching, and you wonder if that kind of connection, however fanciful, might hold some deeper truth. Because really, you do talk to your bees. Not every day, but often enough. Sometimes it's instructions, sometimes it's confessions, and sometimes it's just, "You're doing great, keep humming." The light fades quickly. You light one of yesterday's candles and let the flame flicker near your notes. Everything feels still again, quiet but not empty. You think about the queen, nestled in the heart of her hive, surrounded by thousands of her sisters. Not ruling exactly, just existing at the center of a living, breathing sphere of warmth and devotion. You place another log on the fire, lean back in your chair and close your eyes. And in that moment, you swear you can hear it. Not the wind, not the crackle of wood, but a distant, soft murmur. The collective sigh of 10,000 bees tucked into their winter dreams, dreaming of lavender fields and the slow, golden trickle of sunlight. They're still there, and so are you. The days are getting just a little longer. You can feel it, not in the warmth, because frankly it's still freezing, but in the light. It lingers on the horizon a few minutes more each evening, casting longer shadows across the snowdrifts and bouncing gently off the copper lids of your hives. You take it as a sign. Today, you decide, is for inventory. You pull out your dusty storage bins and begin sifting through everything that's piled up over the seasons. Spare frames, extra veils, old smoker fuel, a tiny wooden bee figurine someone gave you last Christmas with a note that simply read, "For your swarm of secrets." You make a list. It's mostly scribbles like, "Get more nails," and "Why do I have 3 hive tools and no brushes?" But it feels productive, like shaking hands with spring before it officially arrives. You walk out to the hives again, not to open them. Oh no, that would be like waking a sleep-deprived teenager mid-nap, but just to check. You lean close and listen. Stillness. And then a faint vibration, a murmuring pulse of life tucked deep within the wood and wax. You smile and whisper, "Still here, huh?" Later that afternoon, you sort through your library of bee books. Some are ancient and smell like forgotten attics. Others are sleek and full of modern jargon. You find one that describes a particularly odd belief from 17th century England, that bees could detect lies. If a liar approached the hive, the bees would swarm in protest. Historians still argue whether this was folklore or wishful thinking, the footnote says. You wonder how many relationships were tested on the strength of a beehive's opinion. You spend the next hour writing labels for your honey jars, even though you've already given most of them away. Still, it's satisfying, using your neatest handwriting to mark Autumn Harvest, Hive 2, or Golden Blend. Mostly Hive 5, possibly Hive 3, who knows anymore. You make yourself a cup of hot water with lemon and a spoonful of your honey. The flavor is complex, floral, a little smoky, even a tiny zing of mint from that rogue patch of mountain balm they kept swarming last July. You let the warmth roll over your tongue like velvet. It's quiet again. You curl up on the couch with your notebook and sketch some ideas for spring expansion. A top bar hive, maybe, or one of those observation hives with a glass panel, just so you can marvel at the architectural genius without disturbing a single bee. You read a story from Nepal, where honey hunters scale cliffs to harvest wild honey from giant bees, using smoke and handmade rope ladders. The honey is said to have hallucinogenic properties in high doses, and harvesting it is a sacred, perilous ritual passed down for generations. You admire the bravery, even as you pull your blanket tighter and make a firm mental note to never attempt anything that involves both bees and cliff faces. The snow begins to fall again in the evening, heavier this time, blanketing the world in thick, glowing silence. You step outside one last time, bundled like a burrito in 3 layers, and look at your hives. They sit like sentinels, unmoving but alive. Each one holds its own story. Colonies that survived against odds, that swarmed and came back, that struggled through mites and heat and raccoons and still kept buzzing. You feel a kind of awe then, not just for them, but for the rhythm of it all. The seasons, the cycles, the quiet determination of creatures so small and so organized, they practically invented mutual reliance. The night deepens. You light another candle, the little bear this time, and place it near the window, a soft golden reminder. You think of how these bees will emerge soon, in weeks or days, or just the right warm snap. How they'll stretch their wings and start the dance again. Waggle by waggle, petal by petal, and you'll be there, veil in hand, smiling at the chaos like it's an old friend. But for now, there's nothing to do but rest. You watch the snow fall a little longer, then head inside, close the notebook, and breathe. The bees are dreaming. So should you. It begins with a scent, not strong, just the faintest trace of something floral riding the edge of the breeze. You sniff once, twice. Yes, there it is again. Not perfume, not tea, something wild. You step outside and feel it. The shift. The sun, still low in the sky, holds a different kind of warmth now. Not enough to shed your coat, but enough to loosen the frost's grip on the garden gate. The snow has begun to recede in uneven patches, revealing earth that looks startled to be exposed again. Birds are noisier. A squirrel bolts across the fence like it's late for a very important meeting. You walk toward the hives. You're still cautious, quiet, but today there's no stillness. There's motion. One bee emerges, then another, then a whole flurry of them, tumbling out in a chaotic ballet of relief and excitement. They don't go far, just short loops and zippy little figure eights in front of the entrance. Orientation flights, a classic. They're not foraging, not yet. These are the new bees, the fresh batch raised deep inside the cluster, finally stepping out to memorize their surroundings. Sun position, landmarks, scent trails. It's like they're programming their internal GPS while doing an enthusiastic version of the hokey pokey. You laugh. You can't help it. It's messy and wonderful and loud in the quietest way possible. You do a quick inspection, just of the outer parts. No opening the boxes yet, but you check the entrances for debris, peek at the bottom boards, scan for signs of dysentery or mice or other late winter invaders. Everything looks hopeful. You make your rounds like a sleepy monarch waking up to find the kingdom mostly intact. You remember reading once that bees can recognize human faces. Not perfectly, not the way we do, but through something called configural processing. Basically, they see patterns and store them as friend or foe. You wonder if your bees know you, or at least know of you, the giant who smells like smoke and lavender soap and sometimes sings when moving boxes. Historians still debate whether ancient beekeepers bonded emotionally with their colonies or simply respected them as tool, you recall from a dusty journal. You're pretty sure where you stand. Inside, you start prepping your spring gear, cleaning tools, replacing broken parts, assembling new frames. You order some fresh wax foundation and decide to experiment with foundationless comb in one of the hives. Let them build freestyle. Artisanal bees. The sun is higher now. You unzip your jacket a bit. You catch yourself daydreaming, picturing that first full inspection. The one where you lift the lid and find a humming metropolis. Frames of brood, cells of pollen, gleaming rows of fresh nectar being fanned dry. You imagine spotting the queen, stately and glossy, surrounded by her entourage like a VIP in a velvet hive club. But you also brace yourself. You know not every colony survives winter. Sometimes it's quiet for the wrong reason. Sometimes, no matter how careful you were, the cluster collapses, the food runs out, the mites win, so you approach Hive 7 last. It's been suspiciously quiet. You knock gently, no reply. You lean in, hoping for a hum. Nothing. You open it, and it's empty. No movement, no cluster, just scattered wax and a few frozen bodies at the entrance. You breathe in. Outside, you knew it might happen. You tell yourself it's part of the cycle, loss and growth, but still it stings. You take a moment. Just stand there with your hands in your pockets, letting the absence settle in. Then you start the cleanup. You remove the dead bees with care. You scrape old comb, check for signs of disease. None. Just a winter that went too long. Maybe a queen that failed late in the game. You'll reuse what you can. The wax, the boxes, even the frames. You whisper a quick thank you before closing the hive for the last time. Not out of superstition, just habit. A small gesture. You spend the rest of the day helping the others. Fresh pollen patties here, a little syrup there. Just enough to give them a boost, not enough to make them lazy. You inspect a bit more closely now. Look for eggs, for signs of drone brood, for that particular glisten that means nectar flow is near. And in the middle of it, a small miracle. You spot her, Queen Eglantine from Hive 2. Fat and purposeful, striding across the frame like she owns the place. Which, to be fair, she does. Her attendants groom her, feed her, clear the way. She pauses as you hover above, then disappears back into the shadows of the comb. You grin and close the hive. Evening comes faster than you expect. The sun dips again, the breeze sharpens, and the bees begin to cluster back inside. The noise fades to a gentle murmur. You sip tea on your porch and watch the hives exhale one last breath of golden light. And just like that, the day is over. The bees are home. So are you. The light has faded now. The world outside your window has gone still, save for the occasional creak of a settling branch or the whisper of the wind tracing its way along the eaves of your roof. Your bees, snug in their waxen chambers, have curled together again. Tiny thoraxes pressed side by side, sharing warmth like embers. You picture them sleeping, though you know bees don't really sleep like we do. They pause, they still, they rest in a rhythm all their own. You imagine that stillness anyway. It's comforting, like the soft hush of a room when everyone inside has finally exhaled. Inside, you lower the lights. You feel that same drowsy quiet settling into your own bones now, gently tugging at your thoughts and unraveling the day into soft strands of memory. The scent of warm wax, the vibration of wings, the snow that fell and melted in the same breath. It's been a full season. You've learned more than you meant to, lost more than you expected, and somehow held on to a quiet joy through it all. Your hands, once stained with honey and propolis, now rest easy in your lap. You let your breath slow. The rhythm of it starts to match something older, something deeper, like the hum inside the hive, like the steady pulse of spring drawing near. You close your eyes. Let the stories float away now. The bee saints, the cliffside harvesters, the snow-capped lids of your apiary. Let it all soften. The hive is calm, the bees are still, and you are finally still too. Sleep well, beekeeper. Tomorrow will buzz in its own time. End of script. Sweet dreams.